button. And to just start this off light, first off, thank you all for joining another Scrum Wednesday or Scrum Sredom or Sriedom, whatever you want to call it. All are valid. Today we have 3 guests coming from same yet a bit different fields. First off, we have Sergey with us, who is our guest from Moscow. He's a fellow PST. He is quite a character, somebody who is, beside that, a training cognitive behavioral therapist. He is a Kizomba trainer. He is an ex-developer. He's probably one of few people I met ever considering Perl a valid option. We have then with us also Mario, who is Magister of Psychology. He is somebody with high background in organizational psychology, and he is the editor and organizer of Unpopular Psychology website, or Nepopularna Psychologia. It's something that is really interesting, and if you want to read a more scientific view on things that are popular psychology and disassembling them to actual scientific things like lately they did to MBTI, I highly recommend it.
The article, not MBTI.
Yes, I don't recommend the MBTI. I do recommend the disassembly that was conducted by the fellow gentleman here. And last but not least, we have Luka Mitrović, my dear friend from high school days. Somebody who is also who did study psychology and has quite a background in working in large systems and leading teams. So the 3 of them here are all Scrum Masters, Agile coaches to an extent, and psychologists. And who better to ask than them? First question of the day, and that is there any psychological basis in Scrum and Agility? What do you see? Is there any research that can back that up? Is there any, at least, working hypothesis that you could go with?
Okay, thank you. So yeah, if I may start off with this subject, because thank you, because I'm that's right up my alley. All right, so first of all, thank you all for joining in, and thank you, Bogdan, for a wonderful introduction and for commercial for my last article for Nepopularna Psychologia. Okay, yeah, so when we are talking about the research and maybe some theories, hypotheses about Scrum, we have to ask ourselves, are we looking for direct research of Scrum, or are we looking for some research that can implicate that Scrum is valid? So, for example, if we are looking for that kind of research, we could connect some research with Scrum. For example, it's found that having a clear short-term goals that increases our engagement. So we can connect that with the idea of sprint and having a sprint goal. But for me, the more I got into Scrum, the more I started to notice how well it is overlapping with one of the most popular and widely researched models in organizational psychology. So when we are talking about job characteristics model, I won't get too deep into it because we probably have a number of subjects to go over tonight, but I'll just summarize it as quickly as I can. So the model is widely researched, and it is being proven since 70s in many different organizational settings. So what basically job characteristic model, that is model done by Oldham and Hackman in 70s. So we have 5 main characteristics that affect our important work outcomes. Primarily, we are talking about motivation, we are talking about efficiency, we are talking about job satisfaction, we are talking about absenteeism and turnover, and some other, but those are like primarily outcomes we are talking about. Okay, so million dollar question, what are those 5 characteristics that are so important in our work settings? So first off is skill variety. So the more meaningfulness is found in jobs that require several different skills and abilities than those who are elementary and like in routine. Next up, we have task identity, and that means like the degree to which the job requires the worker to identify and complete a work piece with a visible outcome. Okay, so like the piece of work where you can see the beginning and the end and like that part as a whole. Okay, next up we have task significance, and that means the degree to which the job affects organization, maybe even like you can say people's lives, the influence that can be either in organization or in some external context. Okay, so that's three. We have autonomy, which is like widely appreciated in organizational psychology and one of the main predictors of many important outcomes. And autonomy, as the name itself says, it's the degree to which the job provides the employees with significant freedom, independence, allowing them to plan out their work, to determine the procedure in the job. And, you know, with the jobs with a high level of autonomy, the outcomes of the work depend on the workers and not some managers or some manual book. Okay, and last but not least, of course, there is feedback. And we are talking about feedback which is clear, which is specific, and which is actually actionable. After you get it, you can do something about it. Okay, so in Scrum, we can find a connection between these 5 job characteristics and different aspects of Scrum, that is some different practices in Scrum. And as I got more into Scrum, the more I saw that this connection was obvious and nobody was talking about this. I don't know why. So, okay, maybe as I was listing these job characteristics, you already figured out what it could be, but I'll just name a few examples. So for skill variety, we are trying to have T-shaped people in Scrum teams. We are trying to have the team, which is the unit where the work comes in and not specific roles. And regarding task identity, so task identity, we have user stories, and completion of work with a visible outcome is actually increment after each sprint. So that is basically it. And next up we have task significance. So task significance, it can vary in Scrum. Maybe you are on some project that you don't like, but even then we have backlog, which is sorted by value and value and what is most important is done first. So also one of the indicator of task significance in Scrum is question why during each planning session, as we can see in the last issue of Scrum Guide. Autonomy is probably the most saturated one in Scrum teams because they are by definition self-organized, that is self-managed. Also, they try to continuously improve their own procedures, practices, actually their job characteristics, which is like the name of the model. And last but not least, of course, feedback, which is in Scrum, I think in more practices, it's very important. Like daily Scrum, it's immediate feedback. Retrospectives can also be seen as a tool for feedback. And of course, review with feedback from our stakeholders and product owner. So there is a lot of feedback going on in Scrum as well. So to summarize, I think there is huge potential in researching this well-known model in connection with Scrum. And the 3 main reasons why I think that that's the case, because if we connect Scrum with this, it probably shows promising connection, but we have to research it. And yeah, if we find that kind of connection, Scrum will become even more evidence-based framework. It will become more interdisciplinary viewed and more popular, and that means that it will be implemented in even more different environments. And lastly, the popularity within organizational psychology can be seen as maybe an enabler for implementation in organizations that with not just approval, but from maybe initiative from departments like human resources from psychologists. So, and now probably the question is there research regarding this model? Systematically, no, but we are trying to do that as we speak, because we are developing, that's why I know so much about it, because we are developing a research design with 2 like me and two professors from University of Zagreb, from Department of Psychology, are trying to connect this model with Scrum teams, and we are just in the design phase and brainstorming phase. So if you have any idea, I won't get into too detailed into research because some of you will probably be my participants. So I'll just leave that for the future. But yeah, I think if you are looking for a theory in organizational psychology that overlaps with Scrum, I think this is the perfect one because it's very well researched and very well popular. So yeah, I think that this is the one.
Yeah, so let me build up on that a little bit. So first, if you consider different research on motivation and people's psychological well-being when it comes to work-related settings, you will find a lot of things that are similar to what Mario just said, like having autonomy, having clear feedback, and it's definitely all of this exists in Scrum framework. So one of the way how to criticize this would be like, okay, you can use Scrum to make employees happy, but does it actually help organization to provide more value and to prosper? Again, there's no direct research in this area, but there was, for example, an article in Harvard Business Review in 2019, I believe, about Italian researchers using 116 startups to see if application of scientific method, which is as one of the examples is Lean Startup framework, and which is basically this inspect and adapt feedback loop, which is the core of Scrum, whether this scientific method helps startups to succeed. And what they found is that there was a strong correlation between ability of these startup founders to create a hypothesis, test them using like short feedback loops on real customers. And if you think about it, it's exactly what Scrum kind of nudges us to do, right? To create the increment as soon as possible, then give it into the hands of real users and then see how they interact with that, and based on this inspect and adapt. So I'm in agreement here with Mario that while there's no direct evidence that Scrum, at least no direct evidence other than just case studies, which is not the bad kind of evidence, but sometimes it's not the best, let's say it like this. There's a whole bunch of indirect evidence showing that using empiricism, creating these feedback loops, allowing people to have some space for autonomy and to find meaning in their work, and also to do some meaningful tasks and break them into smaller chunks. All of these leads to a very successful organizations, both from the psychological well-being perspective and from the like economical view or success. I mean, from the terms of the goal of the organization, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would just like to add that it's interesting that organizational psychology, like any part of psychology, is based on empiricism, just as Scrum. So it's basically the same principle. Like if it works, we'll build up on that idea, and that's the great thing about both of those things. And regarding anecdotal and case studies evidence, there is some, and actually one of the studies from 2007, it's called Job Satisfaction and Motivation in Large Agile Teams. It is based on just like 5 interviews with Scrum teams, but they actually touched on the job characteristics theory, and they found, but I guess they're not, we are not talking about psychologists, we are talking about people from IT background when they are researching it. So it's a bit different and different kind of interviews, but they found the support of increase in job satisfaction and motivation. The one also a part of research, and this is the funny one because it's like recent. It's from 2019, and it is done on 12 teams in Brazil. And so they found like developmental agile training helps teams with tools to tackle their problems and in relationship within the teams. So they found it really useful, and they didn't research just Scrum. They did the research on different agile approaches. So in that case, agile in general helped teams to work together better. So we have also we can forget that part of research as well. That should also be more researched. Yeah.
So I want to be the devil's advocate at this point, and basically say that, okay, I don't think it's ever been that much in question that Scrum in its essence, with the motivational theory behind it, leadership theories behind it, the approach to work behind it. I mean, that's why it was created by the people doing the work again, that it's going to help people do work better from the perspective of the people. I think it's kind of difficult to make the claim that Scrum works based on not anecdotal evidence, but the difficulty in an experimental design that would be necessary for an empirical study of actually figuring out whether Scrum works is an ethical one in essence. You can't really assign unsuspecting individuals like, you're going to be Scrum, like full, you're going to be Scrum Bun or some other insanity, you're going to use safe, and you're going to go waterfall. That would actually give us a certain amount. Everything else is, in my opinion, at least, incidental evidence, things that we are seeing patterns in that may not be there, things that might have a number of confluent variables inside there that we just can't count, especially in the business sense of it. Like if the startups, and I'm going to look at the research a bit later, but if the startups are comprised of people who were already introduced to those techniques and were actually living those values, then it would work better for them. It would actually create better value for them. But would that work for everyone or not? That's what I'm kind of getting at. That's where I'm far more cautious than I think the two of you on the fact that I'm not really sure that it works from an empirical point of view. It does work apparently in practice, and we've all seen it. Like I think we can all agree on it from our points of view because we live it and like it and love it. It works. But from a scientific point of view, I'm finding it difficult to think of, and we talked about this a bit earlier. I find it difficult to think of a design of an experimental design on how you would prove that it works. I mean, that's an issue with psychology as a science. Basically, it's kind of difficult to make something that's an ethical experiment without actually straying into deep non-ethical territory. I mean, that's my take on this, especially.
Yeah. So yeah, and I totally agree with you, because we will need a huge sample and from different organizations to rule out as many variables as possible, but you can never rule out all the variables. And one thing that I think is missing really in research today is a longitudinal study. Definitely. So we have like maybe 2 or 3 different firms, and we are having measurement of different outcomes in Scrum teams and not Scrum teams in the same company, in the point of beginning of training of Scrum maybe, and then on the end, and then 6 months later or 1 year later. And so then you can like through time in that single team, through time through different teams, and through time in the same company. So that would be, for me, that would be like really good design. Also very expensive. Yeah. I don't think we will do that from our first try, but yeah, I think that would be a really, really great indicator whether it works or not. And I'm not saying it's gonna work 100% because that's not very scientific of me to say. I have a love for Scrum, but I have a love for data even more. So I can't know what my results will be, but I think that would be a good design, maybe to indicate some longitudinal effects of Scrum training. Yeah.
But to me, at that point, then the definition of value would be kind of difficult to ascertain. Like, what is the business value in that kind? Like, does it change over time? Is it staying fixed? Is it the same for teams that are using Scrum and teams that are not using Scrum? That's the question for me. Like, it's a complex environment. Some might even say chaotic, which means there isn't a good way to measure what's connected with what. I think it's even impossible in a complex environment to do that type of data mining research. It just won't work. What we can do, and what definitely has been done, is just showing the adoption of Scrum, which definitely is an incidental thing, but it shows that people think Scrum works. And like most cults and generally miracles work, if you believe enough in it, it does happen and it does work. So I think we're kind of there for now.
Well, I have an argument on that related to that. So first of all, we cannot expect from empirical science to prove anything, because it's impossible to prove things with an empiricism. You can just provide like stronger and stronger evidence, right? And then again, doing it in a spirit of Scrum, we will just make the decision based on the best current knowledge that we have, which at least in my view points that the empirical approach, not Scrum specifically, but the foundation of it, works pretty well for solving complex problems. And the best evidence I can get for this is just this fact that we are here gathered together, separated by 1,000 kilometers, and have an opportunity to have a conversation, which is the result of unbelievable technical breakthrough that happened within the last, I don't know, 100-something years, which was like, has this long foundation of very long history of human development. But basically, as soon as we started using empiricism, which happened not so far, which is basically we reinvented ignorance, right? So we said, okay, let's imagine that we don't know something and let's test it, right? And we have this dramatic increase on all measurements of human well-being that can be imagined. And by this, I think that this is one of the most compelling, at least for me, evidence that using empirical approach in general is a great thing to do. And regardless of whether it's a nonprofit or the commercial endeavor or something else. And then using this empiricism, we try something. Yes, this is not the perfect experiment, especially if we're speaking about developing our own company. We don't have the luxury of building the same product with multiple teams. Let's see who will build it better, right? But then we can adjust based on the feedback that we get from inside and outside. And so I don't think, while I totally agree that it's very good to have such research, because it could provide some interesting insights on how to maybe adjust the approach or Scrum framework itself to make it work better, and also to know what are the environments in which it fits and doesn't fit, because Scrum is not the thing, right? It's not the answer to all the questions. But then I don't think that it's really necessary to have like very solid evidence to just try it and then see how it works, right?
Yeah, I agree. Empiricism in that sense, 100% agreed with that. Empiricism is definitely one of the best ways to approach complex situations.
And maybe the further the research goes, we can identify some major variables that in fact, or how well the Scrum is implemented, some downfalls, and then in the future we can go around it. So that's like the...
You'd be approaching it with Scrum. You'd actually be doing Scrum with Scrum from a scientific perspective, and I think that's great. Honestly, I think that is the best way to do it, is to approach it from an empirical standpoint. But that's exactly it. So that isn't Scrum. That is empiricism. It is the inspect and adapt cycle that has existed long before Scrum as a framework that fell together. So empiricism works. The inspect and adapt cycle work. Transparency definitely works. But does Scrum as a whole work in a scientific sense? We have no idea. Will we ever know? Probably not. Does it functionally matter at this point? Also, probably not. Because if it works for us, hey, it works. We're happy with that, and we can move on.
Yeah.
So Bogdan, are you happy with your answer?
Was there an answer?
I got more questions than answers now.
Good. That means it's working.
Well, but let me just then ask another thing here that comes to mind, and that's there are strongly defined roles in Scrum, so 3 of them, and with, let's say, PO and developer roles more or less clear, I would really like to, and especially this being focused on implementation of Scrum, I would like to focus on Scrum Master. And there are multiple things that come to mind. First question that really pops in is, heck, what does the guy do? But the second one would be, there's a lot of using the term coaching. Without going too much into, or let's go first into psychology of it. What do you think then, what does the Scrum Master do, and what is Agile coaching to begin with?
Sergey, do you want to start?
Well, so first, I don't agree with the idea that that most of the Scrum Master's job is related to coaching, because at least for most of the model of Scrum Master competency or Agile coach competency that I've seen, whether it like 8 heads of Scrum Master by Scrum.org, or Lizzie Atkins' model of Agile coach competency, or something else, coaching is just a small part of it. It's a very important part. There's much more about that. And I think that this idea that a Scrum Master is kind of just a coach, or sort of some kind of therapist for a team is a very dangerous misconception, because what it can lead to is people would focus just on this part of the job and leave everything else outside. Like for example, I know a couple of Scrum Masters who believe that their purpose is to be the helper of the team member in any circumstances ever. So they are clearly stating things like, you can call me 24/7, and I will, with any problem that you have, and I will do my best to solve it. Well, how about no? Because you have to keep some boundaries, right? And the thing is that such behavior can create very unhealthy self-reinforcement feedback loop, right? When the team members start to rely on the Scrum Master for any of their problems, therefore they stop solving them on their own, right? And then Scrum Master is needed more and more, and he or she gets their kind of self-reinforcement that, yes, I'm helping the team, I'm doing my thing right. And I believe that this was one of the reasons why the latest version of Scrum Guide, they don't have this servant leader term anymore. They just pointed at a true leader, whatever true means, right? Because there's a whole bunch of misconceptions around that. So having said that, I think that the coaching as a way to help people solve their problem without solving it by yourself is a very useful thing, regardless of whether you're a Scrum Master or you are like a manager in the, or like helping, I don't know, helping daughter to learn how to do something, which I'm doing a lot currently. And so I think that's important competency, but it's more important to keep the balance between different things. Does it make sense?
I think we're also a bad group for this, because I think we both agree with what you just said, and we're like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, that's a question. So let's move on. Like, definitely, I think boundaries are the key to that. I'd add that I have a certain preference towards not using the term coaching, especially coming from a psychological background, purely because of everything that it entails. It carries a lot of stuff into it, and a lot of preconceptions, a lot of dangerous ones, and I agree with that, just around people's issues, or even lifting people up in a sense that's not a business one. And I shared this with you guys, and I wanted to share it with the rest of the group. I've had an experience where when I was younger and a younger team manager for the first time, I stepped out of bounds. Basically, I helped people out with issues that were personal, basically, or just meddled in there even when asked. And the reason why I figured out that was a bad idea, among others, was that we had a management meeting, a training of sorts, where I kind of discussed my behavior and was told that that's a legal liability for starters, because you're messing from a very powerful position of, that's a traditional management structure. You're messing from a powerful position into people's emotional states and lives, and that's definitely bad. Even if you were asked, that's a liability. But ultimately, that's neither my job nor my place to do. And Sergey mentioned something a couple of days ago that you can't change people. There isn't such a thing that you have the power or the ability to change others. Therefore, just to loop back, coach is definitely an important part of a Scrum Master's role, because you have to help people grow. But in my head, the boundaries are the key to that. There are places and spaces where you neither need to go, nor are going to be invited, nor need to go even if you are invited. Because ultimately, even if you try to set boundaries, people will try to push them with their own, will try to kind of cajole you into getting into their space and helping them fix issues, especially if, like I am, if you are like I am, that type of person, that type of personality that likes to help and fix things. Ultimately, that's, I think, the biggest question here is how to set the boundaries as a Scrum Master on, this is the job that we're doing, this is how I'm helping you do that job, sometimes by not doing anything, sometimes by letting you go make mistakes and then learning from them, like just being there and pointing stuff out when necessary. And to me, that would be the essence. That would be the essence of coaching. The techniques of it are essentially, irrelevant. Which techniques you use is completely, up to you. There aren't best ones, just like there aren't, best practice guides for coaching in general. But I think that's the key takeaway for me. Like the boundary setting of it is why I think coaching in Scrum Master roles or any manager roles is a very ethical minefield in a sense, if the boundaries are set poorly.
And on that note, I may add that lately, even on our like Croatia, Serbia, I don't know, I see the more and more psychology people from a psychological background are coming to Scrum Master roles, which is great, but it comes with this challenge, because people will approach you because they know you are a psychologist, and they will start talking about some maybe personal issues, or just sometimes just for some kind of advice, because they think you may have an answer. So, and when that happens to me, I don't, well, it was never out of, it was never too extreme, but when that happened, I always started conversation. Well, okay, so just to be clear, you are not my client, I'm not your psychologist, so let's get that out of the way, because there is a very simple language in ethic codex of psychology, which there is very definition what is therapeutic, and in psychology what is the relationship between client and clinical psychologist or psychotherapist, and we are not having that here, but we can talk non-formally about some issues, or I can maybe recommend someone to you, but I will not be the one who's treating you, let's say it in that language. And on the note of coaching, I don't like to, I never actually use word coaching in my experience, because it as Luka said, and Sergey as well, it's connected with all kinds of things today. And I don't want people to think that, so I don't want there to be a misunderstanding, let's say it like that. And for me, the coaching was always connected with transformational leadership on one hand, and maybe a situational theory on the other hand. So like situational theory tells you that you have to take context and person in both into, like when you are making decisions about your leadership or what kind of technique will you use with which team or which team member, you will think of context like task, organization at that moment, and even you with your methods and previous knowledge on one hand, and the other hand you will take into account the person, their abilities, are they high or low, maybe they just come into team, maybe they're new team member, and you will also maybe take into account their feelings about this. So you will take all of this and maybe then make a decision about how will you approach them. That for me is like the level of self-awareness you have to have as a, what some may say as a coach. And transformational leadership, on the other hand, is just a like new kind of leadership regarding the tradition, like we have traditional on one hand and transformational on the other, where you can, where it's there is like influence by example. So influence by leading people by example and not by telling them do this or do that. And I think that's very important. And also in transformational leadership, there is individual consideration for people needs and their own context, same as situational model. And also intellectual stimulation and caring about motivation of team. So that kind of things. But all of those things that I talk about are more concrete than coaching, and that's why I like those terms better. So yeah.
But you mentioned emotions. You mentioned people's emotions about a subject, and that triggered, that piqued my interest.
Like, oh, okay. So maybe, all right. So what I had in mind when I talk like feelings about the tasks, probably I think you are referring to that because
yeah. But the emotion part of it, like what they feel about it, is that's where I think the pitfall is.
Okay.
That's where I think it starts getting tricky.
I just think that we have to admit that some people are really frustrated with something and it's visible. So it's not like you're gonna give them questionnaire about their emotions. You're just gonna see the person is frustrated and maybe talk about it. So I maybe ask, is everything okay? I thought about in like that sense.
Yeah, I know, and this is again coming from my experience. I've had definitely unpleasant situations where that's an assumption that I make about someone. That's an emotional assumption. Like I see your behavior and deduce your emotion from it, and then I act upon that deduction. And if that deduction was wrong, if the initial assessment was wrong, consequences can be kind of catastrophical because you just literally came up. So is everything okay? And then they're like, why? And you're like, well, I don't know. I was just passing by and asking questions. But all joke aside, that's kind of where I'm coming from. The boundary portion of it is very important there in that emotional sense, because ultimately a person can be not frustrated with their task. They can be frustrated with something that had nothing to do with work, something that they brought in from home, outside, whatever. Nothing that's in your remit or kind of your stream of thought, but they are experiencing frustration because of the task. So that's kind of the minefield that I'm seeing there from both an ethical and kind of a psychological standpoint. Because again, most Scrum Masters, I think, are not psychologists and are not trained in therapy work. So for them, I think it would be more difficult to figure out where that boundary lies, especially with a lot of coaching today being particularly aimed towards that type of technique, like those techniques, like figuring out what people are thinking and how to approach them afterwards, which some coaching actually, states that that's what they'll teach you to do, like figure out what people are thinking and then act accordingly towards that, which to me is a very huge like red mark on how about we just talk to people and go from there, not going to deduce what they're thinking.
Yeah, but I don't know how it's in your area, but at least here in Moscow, it seems like there's quite a lot of people who are entering the Scrum Master role with some background in psychology or in coaching. And like relating to what you've said, Luka, it can create, if you combine these three things, like the therapist training, the kind of natural attitude towards helping people, and expectation from the team that you are, as a Scrum Master, is going to support them, it can create very dangerous situation when it's really hard to set the boundaries. And it's kind of dangerous both from the team's perspective and from the Scrum Master perspective, because what I see sometimes is that coaching supposes that all the responsibility for clients' reactions and their psychological their psychological state is on the client side, right? As opposed to therapists, when the therapist takes responsibility, at least partly, for what's happening with client, because he or she is supposed to kind of observe that and adjust the level of interaction, like the speed, etc. And so having this thing, while having, and this assumption can be implicit, like, so team expects you to help, and they also expect you to take responsibility because you are a trained therapist and you are willing to help, but you are expecting that, okay, I'm coaching here, therefore it's their responsibility to take care of their feelings, emotions, etc. And it can be like very, how to say, like very dangerous environment, right? And also there's such thing as dark side of the coaching, or psychology, or whatever, like, so sometimes people use these techniques in order to manipulate people. And this, in most cases, it doesn't work well in long term. It can create some short-term successes that allows such people to move forward, like especially if they have this dark thread. You probably heard about that. And having said that, again, it's about the balance, because and I want to relate to what Luka, you've said about asking a person how he or she is doing. If you look at the literature on leadership and management, most of it tells that it's important to know something about the person outside of the work. But then it's really hard to have this boundary between like being interested in person's like family life or some personal issues and trying to actually solve them or improve them somehow, especially if the measure of improvement is the way how you believe it's supposed to work, right?
Yeah, which is, I think, the worst thing ever, but yeah.
Yeah. And so this also kind of connected, from my perspective, to the thing that in many organizations, Scrum Master role considered as an entry level position. But in order to learn how to kind of set these boundaries and to how to adjust them based on the situation and the person you're communicating with, you really have to have quite a lot of experience working with the team, being a leader in different situations, and maybe some managerial experience. And that creates like mismatch, right, between the expectations of the organization and the abilities of the person, the skills, and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, especially if you take into consideration that some of the therapeutic techniques that you would actually be learning at an entry level, such as, I don't know, active listening, which is like one of the major things in therapy and in Scrum Mastering and in general human communication. Like, there's a lot of overlap between therapeutic techniques and general coaching techniques and even just good communication practices.
Yeah.
And that's what that starts getting confusing. Like, when you're actively listening, because, and I can test from a managerial perspective, there's a moment where you should actively listen to someone, but you should never step away from the position that you're ultimately their supervisor, or that they're your subordinate, or that in any case you're responsible for their work down the line, or however you want to look at it. So ultimately there's always this balance. In active listening, you have to be very focused on what the person is saying, how they're saying it, where the nuances, their body language mirroring and stuff like that. While on the other hand, there's a lot of power play going on always in that type of relationship. There's always a power play going on, which is sometimes, at least in my experience, has been incompatible between the two. The Scrum Master role is thankfully a bit better in that regard, purely because it's not a managerial role in a sense. You are a leader, but not a manager. Those people, the people in the Scrum team, the developers, and of course the PO, don't actually in any way are under you in the organization. Therefore, you're not physically in that sense responsible for them. It helps set the boundaries for that to be more equal, more egalitarian. But again, you have to kind of talk to people. You have to get to know people. I mean, it would be a very poor Scrum Master indeed, I think, who would know nothing about their team other than what they're working on. And that's it. That would be a very poor Scrum Master. So I think that truly it is a bit difficult for us to and not just, of course, people with a psychological background, right, like the three of us, but everyone. I think it's kind of difficult to learn where those boundaries lie and where you kind of advance that thought, where you lie in there, because ultimately you are your own personality. You're a human being, and therefore have your own ways, like you mentioned, Sergey, of how you think and feel things should be done. And if that's the case, then it's kind of very difficult to figure out where that boundary lies. So yeah, it's again more questions than answers, I would say.
Yeah, but regarding the one thing we can't forget is organizational culture, because what is maybe general for Scrum Master to ask, or like, are you doing okay? Maybe in that organization, that culture, that's not just something that Scrum Master asks for, and that's like my experience in my teams, especially the ones that are together like for a period of years. It's usual talk between team members. So even if Scrum Master asks, "Oh, how are you doing?" It's not viewed as a like, "I wanted to get into your psyche, man." It's just viewed as common courtesy, or maybe I saw something, someone is frustrated, as I said before, because that's my example. That's from my experience. When I ask, "Oh, is everything okay?" If it's something too personal, they'll usually say, "No, it's just nothing." But if it's around the work, and if they know it's something in my domain, like I can't, it's this task or this sprint or whatever, or the communication with product owner, and like, okay, so that's, it may be interesting. That's maybe something we can work on. It's even if something is personal, then it's whole different stories. But we have set boundaries before, and that's good, because they know the boundaries, so they know how far they can go with, at least in my experience with my team members. I think they respect the boundaries, like from my experience.
And you're making me think. I mean, again, we are talking to human beings who are in their own essence complex creatures that need to know their own boundaries. It's sort of a part of growing up. So ultimately, it's as if by part of this conversation, I'm just going back to what I've been saying. It's as if I'm taking away a bit of agency from the people that I've been talking to by saying, no, I'm setting all the boundaries. You get to set nothing. I get to say how much we talk, about what we talk, and so on. So yeah, that's also an easy pitfall to get into, to be the person who sets the boundaries, while the boundaries are in reality set in that interspace between some person would like your boundaries closer, some farther, and so on. So definitely you're making kind of think on it from that angle as well. Like, let's not pretend like we know everything that's going on inside our own heads, let alone everyone else's, but we kind of have to respect their autonomy in that sense.
I agree.
Actually, we have an interesting question. So from the audience, why does the Scrum Master need to know at least a little of psychology? And I would add to that, does he need at all? My opinion is that he needs to understand how little he understands people and how complex they are. What are your comments on this, gentlemen?
Yes. I mean, ultimately, I don't think a Scrum Master needs to know any little bit about psychology at all. If we define psychology as a science and a scientific approach to understanding human thought processes and so on. I'm sure I forgot the actual term for what psychology is, and that also changes throughout the years. But ultimately, if we think that under the banner of psychology fall a slew of communication sciences and communication approaches, therapy approaches, motivational theories, leadership theories, organizational psychology, then yes, because ultimately they all fall under the banner of psychology. But no, you don't need to know neurosciences or like neuropsychology, or maybe even developmental psychology might be interesting, but essentially is non-essential. What you need to know, in my opinion, is how to talk to people, how to set the boundaries between people, how to talk to them, and how to get the best for them out of them without actually presenting yourself in there or just pushing yourself in there, which psychology might help, but it also, if you've been paying attention to what we've been saying, it can also hinder the approach that you have to take with people. Like, because of Mario's educational background, he has to literally step in front and set a boundary of, since I know psychology, this is a boundary that I have to set. If he weren't a psychologist, or if he didn't know psychology that much, that probably wouldn't even need to be part of a conversation. So it's kind of a two-sided coin, in my opinion.
And I think, I don't know who asked the question, but the interesting point that he or she made, great question, by the way, that he needs to understand how little does he know. And I think that really helps when you have a psychological background, because there are all kinds of books about leadership, about communication, about teams. And when you have that background or that kind of knowledge, it helps you be critical of those books. So it provides you some critical thinking for books and materials about team development, team management, leadership, and to look at from the different side. And as you all know, psychology as a social science has a bunch of theories and hypotheses that are more or less evidence-based. So, and in psychology, we are very critical about our own science, and some may say even too critical, but I don't think so. So I think from that point, I think this person is on to the right track. Yeah.
Yeah, and also the answer to this question depends very much on what do you mean by psychology, because I believe that in order to be a good leader, whether it's a scrum master or a manager or just a leader of whatever group you've been happen to lead, one of the most important things, or even maybe the most important thing, is not to know the psychology of other people, but is to know yourself. This, like ancient Greek had this saying, I think on the temple of Dionysius, probably, I don't remember exactly, like know thyself. So, and
Aristotle's cool, I think.
If you think about the psychology as a way of learning more about yourself and learning how to kind of create a healthy relationships with yourself, and knowing how to take care of yourself is very important, because otherwise it can be really challenging to interact with people, especially in stressful situations, when you are unable to kind of regulate your own behavior and emotions and feelings and thoughts. I'm not saying that it's like, I think it's too much to expect from you to be able to help someone do something if you cannot help yourself from in this kind of case, right?
So wouldn't that be a human thing? I mean, honestly, isn't that kind of something we'd expect from everyone as well, to learn those skills?
I will not say I would expect, because the history of humankind proves that this expectation is wrong.
Yeah, definitely,
but I think
not, yeah.
It's something to kind of to aim at, right? To learn more about yourself, and to start with the Socrates premise that I know nothing, and build on that. Like, what if what I know about myself isn't true, or isn't the full picture that I have, right?
Yeah. Psychology, I think, is even a little bit of knowledge is a very dangerous thing, as I've heard it said. So I think psychology is even a hindrance in that sense, because it can lead you into a sense of false understanding of, even that there are a million psychological theories, but especially in the science of psychology, there are people who like certain theories and are defenders of certain theories. And to quote another thing, once you have a hammer, if all you have is a hammer, all you see are nails.
Yeah.
If you see one theory, you have it and you clutch onto it and you use it for everything. I think that's even a hindrance. Then again, being exposed to psychological science helps, like Mario said, keep you critical of it. But maybe too much criticality of stuff that you haven't yet tried is also a bad thing. I am, for instance, personally, I'm critical of a lot of leadership and management books for the same reason why I'm critical of the empirical study of Scrum, because I don't think it's an ethical thing to do and model in an experimental sense, and everything else is just incidental evidence that you can either trust or not trust in a variety of senses. But that, to me, maybe it might be for me. I might learn a lot from reading as much leadership and managerial material I can find, because I'll pick something up that'll resonate with me. It might not be true, it might not be accurate, but just like Scrum isn't a silver bullet, I don't think anything is in a complex environment. So again, a little bit of here, a little bit of there.
Yeah, and if you just scratch the surface, you may fall into Dunning-Kruegers effect.
Oh yeah.
Which is the people who know very little of the field have a very high level of
confidence.
Yeah, in that little bit of knowledge, and the more you learn and you actually come to see how complex the field is, and in the case of psychology, how complex human behavior and the thinking are, and that's in that case it helps you. But if you just scratch the surface, you need to be aware of Dunning-Kruger's effect. And one example of that is Luka will probably agree with me, is MBTI, that people see it as a psychological tool even if it's not. So, and they think, oh yeah, I'm gonna put all these people in the boxes and I'm just gonna know all their interests. So that's the pitfall I'm talking about. Yeah, but great question.
I have a question. I actually have a question for you guys before we move on to other point. What do you guys think about actual psychological testing inside of an environment, inside of a team, inside of an organization? But psychological testing, not MBTI, which is a quasi-scientific insanity, but like actual psychological testing, the big five personality theory. I mean, Sergey, you mentioned the dark triad. Like, what about the big five? Do you think it's an informative thing or something that's concerning in a sense?
Okay. So I had an idea for a while that in order to be comfortable in the Agile team or in Scrum team, you have to have some specific configuration of big five traits. And so I wanted to test this hypothesis, and I've done some testing. I had a very small sample, something like, 40, 50 people probably, and it showed no correlation at all. But the design of the experiment was just like below the bottom, But from what I know from the scientific literature, there are two best predictors of employee performance in a workplace. And these are big five, specifically conscientiousness and narratism, and IQ test.
And neuroticism is invertly correlated.
Yeah. So
yeah.
And IQ. So these three things predict, depending on what research you will take, something like from 30 to 60% of variability in performance, which is by the measurement of psychological science a great amount, because we have a huge number of variables in this kind of stuff. The problem with this, as far as I believe it, right, is that imagine I'm a manager and I want to test my employees using this method. Does it mean that I have to kind of eat my own dog food and do the test for myself? Well, probably yes, because otherwise it's unethical. but then what if it's going to show that I'm a misfit for my role? And it's going to be very grounded in research. The other is that the MBTI, for example, or many kind of like these typologies, they sound really nice. You know, they're much more interesting than these like numbers, which are kind of boring. And so these two combined, I believe, makes these things like Big Five or IQ testing not really popular in corporate world. So it creates threat from one perspective, and it's not interesting enough for another. So,
and I would even posit that it's an ethical point, not just for me as a manager, like if I am a misfit for my role, but what if half of my team is a misfit for their roles?
yeah.
And like, what if they're actually good at their roles, but are a misfit for them? You know, who do you trust at that point? Whether you're like, okay, no, you're a bit too neurotic for my taste because you have like a 51 on it. Nope, you're out. But I'm your best guy. I don't care. Yeah. You're out. And I mean, that's where it gets a bit tricky in my sense. But you know, I've heard of companies here using MBTI as part of their kind of procedure for onboarding people, which is scary, really like scary stuff. But even like psychological testing for me, especially because it's often not actually done by psychologists, it's done by people who have heard of it. And that also falls into a very ethical conundrum for me. So I wouldn't, again, that to me is a boundary setting thing. I've actually done my thesis paper a couple of years after I finished school, but I've done my thesis paper on the people in the teams that I was working with. Thankfully, it was anonymous, or else I would have actually kicked myself. But it was anonymous. But I did it purely because I use the people that I work with that might even feel compelled to answer some things because they work for me. Like, is that an ethical thing, or is it not, even if it's kind of anonymous? Thankfully, I think I had about a 50% acceptance of people actually taking up the test and finishing it, which for a 300-person wide team was actually kind of great. I have no idea how many of them did it honestly, or even how many of them did it just because they wanted to kind of impress me. But I'm just pointing that out as a dimension that I've also thought about is a bit tricky in that sense, especially with psychological testing being the way it is. The Big Five, and that's why I use it as an example, is the most researched personality theory currently in existence.
Yeah.
It's still not perfect. Yeah. It's still not perfect. There's a lot of work being done on maybe a sixth personality trait, and there have been many names for that sixth personality trait because all five don't actually cover the entire spectrum.
Yeah.
Let alone the fact that people tend to think binary in terms of zeros and ones and neurotic and non-neurotic, and everything is not, while this is mostly a continuum. So I kind of wanted to get Mario's opinion on that as well. Sorry.
Yeah. So no, it's totally fine. What I'm trying to say is, if you're using a tool like that in selection, when you're choosing who to employ, I think that's perfectly reasonable because there are great predictors of, some. But if I would not use them in the teams because it never even occurred to me that might help me in some way, because as before I was Scrum Master, I was in HR, and I think I actually can go and look up the Big Five results for my team members, and I never did that because I don't think that would help me in some way. Because if someone is extreme on some of the Big Five traits, you will see that probably. If somebody is extremely neurotic, they'll probably show. Or extremely extroverted, but as long as the team works as a unit, I don't think that I would assess that. But one thing that is interesting, and I think that is like fun tool for Scrum Masters with psychological background, because we know how to use different scales and questionnaires. So maybe if you have like a guy who is struggling with workaholism, okay. Yeah, with too much work, you can like if you are talking one-on-one with him and he's not really getting the sense of maybe how strong his problem is, there is like questionnaire for like 10 questions from 1 to 5, and you can like, okay, do you want to do this exercise? There's like popular questionnaire about workaholism, so you can just put your numbers, and I'll tell you if you are below average or above average. So, and that may give them insight about their own behavior. So I think that kind of tools is it's not something that you will base your some strong opinion, or but it can help you with one-on-one conversations, maybe like short questionnaires like that. And because you're a psychologist, you know how to apply them and how to interpret them and how to find them. Even some may never occur to track a scale for but I think like tools like that can be interesting, and the people do not they don't feel like there is a put upon them, because you ask them, okay, do you want to do this exercise? It could be informative, it could not, I don't know, we'll see. But in that sense it could be helpful. But like doing the whole big 5 questionnaire with 150 or 200 questions, I don't think that can help you really. I don't see, maybe someone can disagree with me, but I don't see how it can help you with work in a team.
So I think even the to me there's still an ethical point, and I keep harping on about it. There's an ethical point in this, in that you're a workaholic and you're not getting that you have a problem. Let's see if I can show you where the problem is. There are a few steps that I probably would not have taken, and that is, and I've met a lot of workaholics in my day, and I've been like, "Are you okay with the fact that you have no life?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Cool, carry on, please, sir.
Yeah.
If you're feeling pressure, just hit me up. Let's talk." But
no. I'm not talking about my experience. I'm just talking about thought experience, about example.
Yeah.
But let's put it this way. If person comes to you as a scrum master and tries like, I have so much work to do, and continue to complain about it but doesn't do anything about it, so in that case you may let's see how serious it is. We can fill out this questionnaire. Maybe you're not workaholic at all, but so you're not saying you are a workaholic, you're just saying, well, there's a tool that will help you to get to know more yourself more better, maybe from that perspective. So I know your ethical questions, I understand them, I agree with them, but I am talking with a bit more transparency, like as an exercise. It's like to be full transparent. What are you doing? You're not like planning like, oh, I'm gonna do this questionnaire and then he's gonna see his problems. I'm not talking in that sense.
Okay, no, thank you, definitely. And the other thing I wanted to kind of point out was, if you're not going to, not you personally, this is not related to you, but generally, like in a company sense, if you're using the big 5 to actually choose whether or not to hire someone, or to move someone through the hiring process, why do you not do that on the existing people that you have inside the company already? Ultimately, the big 5 and the organizational psychology part has been researched in depth, but the actual conclusions are not conclusive. So that's where the 40 to 60% part of it comes. If it's 40%, that means that there's a 60% variability in there that can be explained by a number of other factors. That's why I'm also against deciding on it right out of the gate, me like, you don't fit within our desired profile. To me, that sounds like you're trying to, and this is again a personal statement, to me that sounds like you're trying to create an uber super team of individuals whose personality profiles fit exactly, which is an insane megalomaniacal goal, because it doesn't actually produce value. You don't actually know how those people will react. You have an estimate.
But Luka, but let me just say this. I worked in a selection. So when you do the big 5 questionnaire, you're not going to decide, oh, this person has 51, so he's out. You're going to do an interview after that, and if he is extreme or extremely low on some questions, you will maybe ask a few questions about that trait or behaviors that concerning that trait. You're not going to make your decision regarding one number on big 5 questionnaire. That would be ludicrous. So I think the big 5 questionnaires usage in selection is just one of the tools you use in decision-making process. It's
so
not
the main one.
information,
right? Just
to get more information. Yeah, I think that would be
because I've literally heard this sentence being said, not by you, again, like I said, not by you, but I've heard this sentence of, you don't fit our team. you don't fit our team as in this profile, therefore we won't be continuing with you. I've heard that being said, which is why I'm really, really against that as a practice, as an idea.
Yeah, I think that's really not the way to approach the whole selection process at all. It's completely off. Yeah.
By the way, I heard that statement personally in an interview that I was in as an interviewee. And
yeah, I was using his example. I apologize for appropriating it. I didn't want to out you on this, but yeah, I was actually using his example. Definitely.
And that's, by the way, that's something that struck me, and I was discussing it precisely with Luka once, and I would like to ask you. So I don't know what's the state in Russia or Croatia, but I do know that in Serbia, giving people IQ tests is illegal for the purpose of hiring because it could be a discriminatory factor, to my understanding. That's why it's typically mumbled in under different things.
It's disguised.
Yeah,
no,
it's this.
In Croatia, we say you're gonna take intelligence test right now. It's right out front. It's used in selection process usually. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, but you know, that's a difference between the markets and everything. So not markets, countries, whatever, views. But
I'm sorry, but I'd like to hear what is it like in Moscow?
I don't know actually. So
you've never you've personally never used them, and they've never been like came out and told you, hey, this is an IQ test. How about you taking it?
I have never nor used the IQ test as a way of kind of selecting people for my team, neither taken it as a part of hiring process. So I don't know, but I don't think it's illegal. I think it's just not a widely spread practice.
Okay.
By the way,
but is saying it's torture from his point of view.
No, there was a question about MBTI. Yes, Alexander, we were referring to MBTI. There's also an article about the lack of scientific proof behind it.
The theory behind it and everything. And I'm sorry to speak in Mario's name, but the question is, so Mario has a great article on his website that explains, or doesn't explain, but gives a very good perspective of why the MBTI is not a good test, especially in hiring terms. And the Big Five is, or at least in this sense, is definitely more because it has an empirical basis, empirical background, and has been very, very much researched in a variety of countries and states and everything. It's fairly robust, and Bogdan linked the article. So if you want to ask some more questions, or if you want us to kind of continue that conversation, I'm okay with that. But ultimately, I think Mario explained it so much better than I could. So the article is very good.
Let me share something about this, and I hope you will not burn me for this heresy. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the person taking MBTI or any other typology test for his own purpose, because the very answering of the questions can provide some interesting insights about your own psychology. But it becomes, let's say, problematic as soon as I get the results of this typology test and squeeze all my identity to these results and try to do the same with people with whom I communicate. Therefore, I kind of reduce the whole complexity of myself and other human beings to single number or a couple of numbers or word something. And I think it's much worse when people use the tools that don't have any good evidence supporting their value as a way of screening people, or kind of somehow selecting people from the population to your team. Because, and not just because it's unethical, but also because it's kind of stupid to use the tool that works with the same level of precision as just flipping a coin, right? So you could save a lot of money without, not by the MBTI or any other question, but just use a coin and throw it and see if it's going to work. So you're losing a lot of good people just basing off some evidence-based thing, which is kind of strange, I believe.
Yeah, but I try to tackle that issue as well in an article, because the thing is, regarding your first part about individuals and how can that be something positive for them. One author that wrote an entire book on Myers-Briggs personality questionnaire is that some people for the first time see non-judgmental non-judgmental description of themselves, and that can be like good moment. And if you're using it for your or your entertaining person reasons, that's fine. But when companies use it for selection, then it becomes, like, why don't you flip a coin? And because there's also like a language problem there, because it has like this psychology language, so it sounds like something serious, but it's not really that much evidence based, and some non-psychologists use it because it sounds like it is. So there's not talk around it enough, and maybe some things are so popular there that people uncritically just say, okay, this is good. So I try to tackle that as well in like reasons why it's still so popular in my article. Yeah,
I mean, ultimately, there's no bad way of learning, of getting to know yourself. That's the gist of it. There's no good way. There's no like one best way to do that. One of the best would probably be psychotherapy, in my opinion. But then again, I'm biased, so don't trust me. But I don't think there's one like single worst way of knowing yourself. Everything is an opportunity for you to learn about yourself. It's when you start discriminating against other people is where that starts getting problematic. Especially, I think it's even problematic when you're using more evidence-based discrimination techniques, such as, for instance, the Big Five. It's still problematic. It's a lot less problematic. So it's still very informative, useful, and you at least have some basis in reality and like kind of objective. And I'm using big air quotes around objective, but objective reality, as opposed to the MBTI. But yeah, I think we've beaten about that dead horse.
MBTI is well underground now, but actually an interesting question, and that's one which I started, and I typically describe it of a problem with gorilla wielding a Kalashnikov. It is a gorilla, it is a Kalashnikov, and it has some effect, but it's gorilla wielding it. What I want to ask is, you mentioned a lot of interesting points and mentioned ethics like probably a few dozen times. So you mentioned that you touched subjects of testing, of therapeutic techniques, of coaching, and yes, you mentioned that there is some part of putting the lines. But sometimes people treat retrospectives as group therapy sessions, and they shouldn't be. I agree with that one. But what do you think? Where's the ethics of using therapeutic techniques? Because as I think somebody of you mentioned already, you don't have the therapeutical agreement with the parties. Sometimes people that you are dealing with are not actually even aware of the techniques being used on them, so they are unwilling and unaware participants. And that's precisely something that, yes, it's useful. Yes, you can benefit as, for example, let's say Scrum Master using therapeutical approach, not necessarily techniques, not necessarily something that assisting a go-to person, but in the end, you don't have the right, let's say, even the goal is questionable. It's questionable whether you making the best team will do benefit to a single person. And so that's I would like to start with that ethics thing. Bettering team, does that actually mean bettering the individuals or no? And use of therapeutic techniques and generally psychological techniques to do so, is it ethical or not? What's your take on it? I'm painting this in broad strokes. I don't want to limit you on this one.
Guys, let me first reframe this question a little bit, because I don't think that there's something good or bad about the techniques per se, you know? So for example, the Socratic dialogue, which I currently kind of doing a lot of research about, is just a way of revealing assumptions. And it is used in cognitive behavioral therapy. It is used in philosophical consultations, which doesn't have anything to do with the psychology, but rather focuses on the cognitive thing. It can be used in learning environment in schools and universities as a way of teaching students new concepts. So I don't think or other things like pro and cons analysis and many other tools you can use, these are just the tools. So I would rather consider the intentions and the orientation of these tools, because the same as you can use a knife to kind of cook a meal or to cut someone's throat, but the knife is not the thing to blame. It's rather the person who is doing it, right? And with that, I want to pass the word to other guys, because I don't want to take all the time.
Thank you for the hot potato you just did. No, but I actually agree entirely, and I was going to use Socratic dialogue as an example of techniques that are useful wherever you use them. There are a number of techniques, I'd say, that are therapeutic in essence, or sort of a shadow therapy type of thing, where you talk to an empty chair in front of you, which bears some resemblance to some sort of voice of the customer consultations and confrontations. You can do that with a customer. I mean, it's called using your imagination, not being a therapist. Yeah. So I think I agree entirely with you. It's a matter of how you use it, not what you use specifically. And it's, again, a matter of the boundaries and the intentions of the person behind it. If you're doing it to expose someone's childhood trauma, you probably need to be kicked out of that room very, very quickly. Like that's extremely. But if you're doing it in order to help the team understand the idea behind what the customer is wanting, and maybe, you know, enhance some value, and maybe even enhance them as individuals, like Bogdan mentioned, it's definitely a good point. You want to raise them up in a sense, or, you know, just help them raise themselves up. Then again, that's a good intention. But and I'll pass this over to Mario with perhaps just one last thing, and that is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So there are pitfalls here.
Yeah,
but please.
Yeah, I think you guys said it very well. And the thing that I may add, when you, Bogdan, you said about treating retrospective as a group therapy. So what can be a great danger there, that you can uncover some things that you did not want to uncover, because, well, first you have a group, and second, you may not have the resources or the knowledge to cover it up or to undo the damage you just done. So that there's a great danger there. And like Luka said, with childhood trauma, maybe not in that extent, but yes, why not?
But it should be a safe place, by the way. I think it should be a safe place, quote unquote, because we need to foster honesty. There needs to be an emotion of we can be honest with one another. So I do set the scene of this is a relatively safe place. So there are a few rules, as there would be in a therapy setting. And there's similar rules as there would be in any type of mediation setting. If any of you went to mediation training, same type of rules. You don't talk over one another. You don't yell at one another. There's no cursing, swearing. You control your emotions, and you're responsible for them ultimately. That's a therapy thing, but also a mediation thing, also a human communication thing. So it's very hard to kind of delineate the difference between therapeutic techniques and actual communication techniques.
Yeah, but the part about intention and where are you going, another technique itself, I think that's maybe the main point of this answer to your question, Bogdan.
Yeah, and I would say that as a rule of thumb, as soon as you are using the technique, have some place in the therapeutic toolbox. The first thing that is, I believe, is 100% necessary from ethical perspective is to make it like 100% clear and transparent. What are your intentions? What is this technique aimed at? And if you know any like potential side effects that can be here, just state that clearly. So guys, I think that this is a very powerful technique that we can use here. Like, I don't know if it's a good example, but just something that pops up in my head. Some Scrum Masters whom I know use the metaphorical cards as a way to start communication about the sprint. Like, take one of the cards and see in what sense it reminds you about the sprint that was just finished. And it can provide a very interesting conversation when you start from metaphorical perspective and then you dig into the problems. But I would say that if, for example, I would know that it can also somehow trigger old trauma, I would clearly state that guys, I believe that it can be helpful. Sometimes it can trigger some old trauma, and if that will happen, you just stop and will make a break you to kind of do whatever is needed to kind of put it back if it's possible, right? So have this kind of trigger warning and also be very clear and transparent about your intentions. And as soon as you do this, I think it kind of makes using this stuff much more ethical than otherwise.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't know, on that same note, like an interesting point comes now to mind. If you were to make, like, generally speaking, a Scrum Master code of ethics there, like starting with do no harm, what would you add to it additionally?
I think do no harm is enough. I mean, from an ethical standpoint, it's definitely a good first step. But if we have to go in and actually define the moment of it, do not go where you're not invited, perhaps. Again, I'm coming at it from a different sense, but
transparency is already a cornerstone of Scrum, so I don't know if it needs to be there,
but like, be open about your intentions. What Sergey just said.
Yeah.
Is that an ethical thing, or is that again a Scrum thing more than an ethical thing in itself?
Well, it's both, but I would adjust the do no harm thing because I don't think it's possible to do no harm.
Okay.
So if I was to make some a code of ethics for Scrum Masters, I would probably reduce this to 3 imperatives: do no unnecessary harm, know thyself, and be transparent.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Please drop the mic. That's. Okay, with that said, this was generally my set of questions. I've left some time in to factor in if everybody would like to jump in with questions. So feel free to drop them in chat or just jump in as you see fit. Well, we have this interesting triad here. Maybe not the dark one, but
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. Who knows?
We're not going to take any tests here, and we're not going to give you that answer.
that would be an interesting question. Which part of the dark triad do you feel most comfortable with? Oh, okay. We have, sorry, in Serbia, it is not illegal to give someone IQ test in hiring purpose, but it is unnecessary. Big Five is one of the personality tests that can be given and evaluated by psychologists only. Yes. This test can help us in setting up the team in order to gather around 10 same people to lead and to argue with everybody, or people who do not accept opinions but themselves. As for therapeutical techniques, they are not mystery. Client employees should be informed, but in Scrum, we are not dealing with childhood issues. We are focused on just bare minimum for them to be productive. That's a comment from Maria. And again, but precisely I would then raise the question of minimum, because minimum can be minimum intrusive minimum, and that's a valid point maybe from this.
Well, from my perspective, I think that it's been a bit of a stretch to say that in Scrum we're not dealing with childhood trauma issues, because first, I believe everyone has some sort of childhood trauma with big T or little t, right? And then these little things are triggered all the time when we're communicating. So I don't think it's actually possible to not to deal with childhood traumas in any collaborative environment.
But you deal with their effects, basically. You
Yeah,
don't
maybe I think
Yeah.
I think what Maria tried to say that we are not setting a treatment for trauma.
Yeah, so that's the important thing, that we're not aiming to treat anything here.
We just have to account for their effects, basically. And
Yeah.
it's a human thing. We've all gone through traumas, and we all have that. I think in schema therapy, it's called an actual schema of behavior that stems from childhood. I'm more kind of curious about the first part of this, about the helping us in setting up the team. That's literally the thing I've had, the thing I've raised a couple of issues with Mario as well. Of I'm not 100% certain that'll help, but then again, so will getting those 10 people in a room and letting them fix a jigsaw puzzle together. That might also help. Like, there's no be all end all. And I think there's been a few valid critiques of those longitudinal research in the Big Five and them being predictors of organizational success, where you don't actually follow the people who didn't make the cut. Generally, a problem with interview techniques is that you don't follow the people who don't make the cut.
Yeah.
The people that you've decided on, hey, I'm not going to take him. So what happened with that person? Because it's kind of impossible to keep track of the complexity of that environment. So, and this is, again, just my personal preference has always been, and I did pick this up from Bogdan as well, is when I'm trying to build a team, I'm trying to figure out which people would work well together based on my experience and which people I can work well with. Ultimately, that's been an important moment for teams that I've created, especially, of course, it depends on the purpose that you're making the team for, definitely. But having an input from the Big Five might be useful. I've definitely been sold on that. But I'm very cautious about any type of framework that answers that question of this will certainly work or most certainly work, or these people will most certainly work better together than this group of people. To me, that's a statement that we can't ever prove. Literally, you can never prove that. And that to me is a very dangerous thing to
I think any psychologist with any sense of ethics would never say that this will definitely work and this will not. I think that any psychologist who is knows the basics of ethics and psychometry, he would not say that, or she. Yeah, so
they shouldn't. They shouldn't say this.
They shouldn't. They shouldn't. Yeah.
But generally, in an organizational sense, you get the pressure of, and maybe and you would most certainly know better. I've never been in the HR part of hiring. I've been in the managerial part of hiring, and there's always the pressure of get me the best people for the job or the best fits for the role, which then tends to skew that scale into let me make sure that these people are a better fit. At least that's been my impression so far. Then again, I've been a fairly hands-on hiring manager where I've read most of the CVs that ever came my way. So that could be something that somebody that worked with me from HR would be better equipped to actually say.
Yeah. But I think that people who are thinking in binary terms regarding Big Five and similar instruments, I think they are really taking a leap of faith there. I don't think that's justified at all.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that. I think it was Maria. I'm not saying that Maria said that it was binary. This will work or this won't work.
No. I'm just saying on this.
Yeah, likewise. Like, very cautious about ever saying this might work better, because it's kind of hard for me to say that. There's a body of research that indicates that in some circumstances, for some values of better, that worked-ish for some time. Since we usually don't do longitudinal research, we do transversive. We take a slice in time and say, hey, this seems to work. So I'm definitely cautious about that.
Yeah, but let me kind of defend this approach a little bit, because first, the question is not whether it's a perfect measurement or not, but rather whether it's better than no measurement at all, or whether it's better than just my expert judgment. And there's some evidence pointing that yes, it is better. And the next thing is, as soon as we don't have the best evidence that we would like to have, we kind of, what we can do best is to use the best available evidence. And if it's just like 1 point research, let it be so. At least it's better than just guessing or flipping a coin, right?
Yeah.
No,
As
I said, yeah, I use it as well as informative part of selection process. It gives you information, so it is valuable.
Yeah,
but
as long as it's not a crutch. As long as it's not a crutch, but a valuable tool in our toolbox.
Yeah.
Again, yeah, I've had, and just like Bogdan shared his actual experience, there in the real world where we live in, there are people who are using it as a be all end all. This is what we use, and that's it. So that's why.
Yeah.
By
So
the
we
way,
have another question.
Yeah.
yes, there is another question by Mila. There is some trends that say that psychological safety is more important for team productivity than its selection process. We have chance to hear here. Any thoughts on that one?
I'm not 100% sure I understand. Psychological safety is more important for productivity. Good.
Then selection process. That's
how would you know? I mean,
Yeah,
my first question
I
is, how would you know? Like, it is psychological safety extremely important? Yes, absolutely. And one of the most important factors in the last year has shown us that it's a very important predictor of both personal happiness and team productivity. But how would you know if it's better than a selection process?
Well, actually you can, and very
Okay.
easily. You can just run a thought experiment. Imagine you have two teams. One team consists of the top skilled developers on the planet Earth. The other team consists of just the dumbest people available on the planet Earth. And the first doesn't have psychological safety, the second one has. So imagine which of them would have a better productivity. And I'll bet that the one with expertise but with no safety will do much better.
It depends on what the task is, of course. If the task is be happy and do not have a neurotic breakdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, and psychological safety is also fairly new construct. So there are some still ongoing research. I was present on lecture on psychological safety from the guys who did the experiments. Not this one, because as I read this, I was thinking to myself, well, what kind of design was this that would come with this conclusion? But what they did, they actually found that psychological safety is extremely important. Yeah, that's the part I think we can all agree with. But I think it's fairly new, and I think it needs a more research to understand just how and in what way.
Yeah, and I mean we can go back to attachment theory as a basic theory of human interaction, where it's definitely important to be psychologically safe, securely attached. That's a good thing. Teams work better, but
so I'm not having something against psychological safety. I do believe that it's very important part of work environment. But what I personally kind of a bit confused about this construct is that basically psychological safety, if we define it something like, I don't remember the exact definition that used in research, but it's something like people are feeling safe to express their opinion without being afraid of being persecuted for what they think, right? Something like that. And the thing is that it has two parts. One part is the environment, and the other part is my let's say internal traits. And in many cases, when people speak about psychological safety, they kind of externalize it and say organization has to provide psychological safety. And if we reduce this, kind of use the reductio ad absurdum, it creates this sort of safetyism environment where everyone is trying to keep everyone happy without actually challenging the assumptions and questioning the decisions, which makes it a very bad environment to work, and which inhibits the ability to make high quality decisions, right?
Stress is good. Like stress is good, basically.
Yeah.
In some form, yeah.
And conflict is good.
Conflict is good and stress is good. Not
Yeah.
all stress is made equal, and there's definitely
Yeah.
short-term stress is great, but long-term stress generally leads to a host of psychological issues and physical issues and so on that we're really not equipped to talk about right now. But like short-term stress of having this conversation like this is stressful. I'm sure. I know it is for me. Like I'm fairly certain that it is for people here. It's not a bad stress. It's not a lot of stress, but just having this type of conversation is definitely a little bit stressful, and that's a good thing.
I was just trying to find my notes from that lecture, and I couldn't. But yeah, they actually have a kind of a structure of the construct and what it all includes, and it's fairly done good, and it is to some level evidence based. They get those factors from the data, so I was very pleased to hear that. But yeah, I think there's not all that matters, but it is really powerful. So yeah,
I mean, that's part of Scrum, among other things. I mean, that's ultimately has been built into Scrum. That type of, you need to be able to say this with people. You need to be able to be honest with them.
So, gentlemen, any closing thoughts that you would like to add? Sorry, we have a comment I just saw pop in from Mladen. I would just add, and I think Sergey pointed it out in a certain point. We could rather look at the potential of psychological instruments within the frame of development rather than the hiring, selection, recruitment. If we start the Socrates, I know that I know nothing, then this can be of help on our path to know thyself. We don't have to use them to make 0 or 1 decisions. Anyway, thanks guys. With that said, what would be your closing thoughts for this panel?
Well, I maybe I can go first, since I was the first to talk on the first question. Well, the main title of this panel was psychology, yes, no, maybe, and in that sense, I say yes, and I believe that in future we can see the more meeting points between Scrum and psychology, and I think that it will help both fields. So I look forward to that, and I will try to be a part of that story. That's it from me. I hope you had semi-good time hearing about different subjects from us. Yeah.
Sergey, do you want to then take the second spot?
Yeah, I can. So first, I want to thank you guys for this discussion. I enjoyed it very much, and it provided a bunch of insights for me that I will think of later. And I want to thank everyone for their questions and their comments. They were very valuable. And Bogdan, thank you for organizing this, for making this happen. And while we were discussing the last question, I had this thought popped up in my head that basically most of our discussions were about finding the right balance between extremes, which is one of the ways to define wisdom. It's like, because wisdom is a virtue that allows you to find the balance between different virtues at the right time, in the right place, for the right reason, right? And so I believe that if people would remember one thing from all this discussion, I would like it to be that don't go into extremes. and always try to find balance, because extremes in most cases are not the places where solutions are.
Yeah.
Now I need to follow that, right? I need to follow the
Yeah,
wisdom.
Luka, just before you go, let me just say, one more thing. I forgot, like
Please.
two quick points.
Please, I have to think of something.
We totally forgot to mention that Jeff Sutherland used a lot of psychological research in his book, Scrum Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. There's actually their research on decision making, on time management, something that psychologists did. So that's fun fact. And the second thing, Bogdan, your question about ethics and actually a lot of your questions, I think the best way to answer them is with communities like this and in events like this, and it's important to start the conversation. So I would like to thank both of you for organizing this, and thank you, Sergey and Luka, for this great and for questions from audience. But I think this is the way, to quote Mandalorian. But since we don't have a codex yet, but this is actually starting a conversation is really important in this subject. So yeah, thanks to everyone.
Like my esteemed colleagues mentioned, thanks to Bogdan and Boris for organizing this. Thanks everyone for asking very pertinent questions and making us actually start thinking about everything. The book he mentioned was The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, I think. Wasn't it, Mario? Yep, that's the one. So Alexander, you can see it on the screen. Sergey and Mario, it was a true pleasure discussing this with you guys, and definitely there are some points on which I need to have some thought experiments on to do by myself. What I would ultimately close with would be that there's no such thing as inherently good or bad techniques. There's no such thing as inherently good or bad people. There are just situations and people in them. And that's ultimately the only thing we can aspire to, is to go through that the best we can with the best intentions that we have.
And with that all said, I would really like to thank all three of you, and actually thank you for this conversation. It was interesting to me. It's interesting how we can connect and form communities like this. And I would like to thank all the crew who stayed in and hopefully gained as much insights and interesting thoughts and topics to think about as I did. And with that said, we'll have a pause next Wednesday, and then we will be again having another panel that would precisely discuss the relationship between Agile and coaching, and what's Agile, what's coaching, what's Agile coaching, with Jelena and Milica. So with that said, thanks Mario, thanks Luka, and thanks Sergey once again. Thank you, Boris, for being always a quiet, supportive type. And see you around, probably on Wednesday, but see you other days as well.
Yeah, thank you
guys.
guys.
Thank you, Bogdan.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.